This article is on the Spanish poet. For information on the governor of New Spain, see Luis Ponce de León. Luis Ponce de León, O.E.S.A, was a Spanish lyric poet, Augustinian friar, theologian and academic, active during the Spanish Golden Age. Early life. He was born Luis Ponce de León in Belmont, in the province of Cuenca, in 1527–1528. His parents were Lope de León and Ine Acutes de Varela. His father practiced law, and it was due to his profession that the family moved to Madrid in 1534, and then later to Valladolid. Both of his parents had Jewish ancestry, so he would have been considered to be of converso lineage. Luis obtained a very thorough and extensive education, and was devoted to the interpretation and translation of religious texts and ideas. He was proficient in Greek, Hebrew, and Latin. He entered the University of Salamanca at the age of 14, in 1541, to study canon law under the care of his uncle Francisco. At some point between 1541 and 1543, however, he abandoned his studies and instead entered the Order of the Hermits of St. Augustine. After a novitiate of uncertain duration, he made his solemn profession as a friar at the Priory of San Pedro on the 29th of January 1544. The first record of León as a student of theology emerges in the matriculation book at the University of Salamanca of 1546–7. In 1552, Fray Luis graduated with a bachelor's degree in theology from the University of Toledo and continued his education as a student of Hebrew and biblical interpretation at the University of Alcalá de Henares. Academic career. Having returned to Salamanca the previous year, in 1560 he graduated from the University of Salamanca as a licentiate and Master of Theology, and in the following year he won the election to the chair of St. Thomas, a chair in theology, at the same university. This was a minor chair, with a limited 4-year tenure. In 1565, he won the chair of St. Durandus, to which he was re-elected in 1569. In 1566 he was named administrator of the Augustinian College of San Guillermo in Salamanca, and in 1567 he took on the position of vice-rector of the university. In 1571 he attained the chair of sacred letters as well. While at the university, he translated classical and biblical literature and wrote on religious themes. He was widely known for his works. Imprisonment. In 1571 Dominican professors Barrameda, Medina and Castro put forth 17 propositions to the Inquisition documenting Fray Luis' allegedly heretical opinions. His translation into Spanish and commentary of the Song of Solomon was the biggest evidence presented for the case against him. Another charge touched on his criticizing the text of the Vulgate. As a result, he was imprisoned at Valladolid from the 27th of March 1572 until December 1576. León remained in bad health throughout his imprisonment, though he suffered greatly from his isolation and less than desirable conditions. Fray Luis continued to actively write and study during his confinement. At the end of 1576, the tables turned, and on the 11th of December Fray Luis was cleared of all charges and released from prison with an admonishment to be more careful and reserved in his publications and speech. He returned to Salamanca on the 30th of December in triumph. Tradition has it that he began his university lecture on the 29th of January 1577, his first after returning from 4 years' imprisonment, with the words Dice Bemus Hesterna Die. Later life. Fray Luis continued to teach at the university, being awarded a special chair at the end of 1576, shortly after his acquittal. In 1578 he obtained, for life, the chair of moral philosophy, and in 1579 was elected to the most significant chair in the university, the chair of Holy Scripture. He went on to earn a Master of the Arts degree from the University of Sahagún. Fray Luis did not pay heed to the cautionary admonishments of the Inquisitorial Committee after his earlier imprisonment. In 1582, he had another inquisitional run-in, following 3 disputations held on the subject of the merits of Christ and human predestination, but was not this time imprisoned. He was absolved 2 years later, in 1584. Fray Luis's first published Spanish and Latin works emerged in 1580, some having been begun in prison. Most of his works were printed during this decade. Between 1583 and 1585 he published the 3 books of his celebrated treatise, The Names of Christ, which he had written in prison. In 1583 also appeared the most popular of his prose works, The Perfect Wife, an instruction for newly married women. In 1588, Fray Luis published the first collected edition of the writings of Teresa of Avila. To produce this work, he had performed the task of collating her manuscripts, checking references and notes, and preparing a definitive text. He died at the age of 64 on the 23rd of August 1591, in Madrigal de las Altas Torres, Avila, and is buried in Salamanca in the Priory of San Agustin. 10 days before his death he was elected Vicar General of the Augustinian order. Major works: Cantar de los Cantes. In 1561, he began translating the Song of Songs into Spanish for his cousin, Isabel Osorio, a nun in Salamanca who could not read the Latin text, and wrote an accompanying commentary. This was León's first major translation of a biblical text, and was probably inspired by a commentary his contemporary Arias Montano had lent to him when he passed through Salamanca in 1561. Translation of biblical texts into Spanish had been banned by the Council of Trent, so there was a certain risk in this undertaking. The manuscript, however, was popular amongst his friends, who copied it and circulated it privately. However, the translations formed part of the accusations leveled against León when he was denounced to the Inquisition in 1572. Because of the controversial nature of the text, it was not published until 1798. In Cantica Canticorum Salomonis Explanatio. This was published in 1580, and built on an earlier Spanish commentary. He revised and enlarged it in a 1589 edition. La Perfecta Casada. This book is Fray Luis' interpretation of the Proverbs of Solomon, and was written as a moral exposition to his newly married young niece. It advises all young women on the proper behavior and duties of a married woman, both in regard to her husband and her children. The book quickly became a popular wedding gift to young women of the era, as it was an instruction manual for marriage. In addition, this book was a revolutionary defense of women's roles in society at the time. It was first published in 1583, and was popular, appearing in 6 editions by 1632. De los Nombres de Cristo. Another well-known work. This was written as a guide to the layman about the essential principles of the Church. It is written in dialogue form about 3 friends who discuss 14 of the scriptural names of Christ over a period of 2 days in a country, a state. Each book ends in a lyrical meditation expressed in a poem. The predominant theme is the centrality and universality of Christ. The work grew by stages. The first edition of 1583 is made up of only 2 books, considering 9 names in total. The second edition of 1585 adds a 3rd book, considering 4 names, and adds the name Shepherd to the first book. Finally, the posthumous edition of 1595 includes 1 extra name, Lamb. The structure of the 3rd edition was used for the 1984 English translation. The work quickly became popular in Spain. 7 editions were printed by 1605. Effluisia Legionensis Augustiniani Theologia e Doctoris, and Amp Divinorum Librorum Premier Pud Salmanticensis Interpretis Explanatorum in O.E.S.A. In 1589, Fray Luis published a volume of Latin commentaries on Obadiah, 2 Thessalonians, Galatians and the Song of Songs. These represent the summit of his achievement as a biblical scholar. Exposition del Libro de Job. This is another contribution made by Fray Luis to make scripture available to those who could not read Latin. In other words, he wanted ordinary people to be exposed to the biblical message. The story tells of Job's patience and suffering, and also serves as a correctional guide to man's behavior. It is written in both verse and dialogue, to make it both enjoyable and informative. León began the work while in prison, and had completed 35 chapters by the end of 1580. He resumed work on it 10 years later and finished the work in 1591, a few months before his death. He dedicated the work to Mother Anna de Jesus, to whom John of the Cross had dedicated his spiritual canticle. Fray Luis had come to know her in recent years, both in preparing the first edition of the works of Teresa of Avila, and in defending the privileges of the discalced Carmelite nuns against proposed changes in the Terracan constitution. It was first published in 1779. 23 original poems in Spanish. Fray Luis composed a number of poems, the majority probably between 1559 and 1584. He did not publish them, but circulated them among his friends. They were first published in 1631, when Quevedo printed them. The canon of Fray Luis's poetry, as fixed by Hispanists, consists of 29 poems. See 2 of his most well-known examples below: The Life Removed and Ode to Salinas. Poetry selections. The Life Removed. In the poem The Life Removed, of which an excerpt is shown below, Fray Luis, following the Beata Seal theme introduced by Horace, expounds upon the notion of choice and its consequences. He says that those are irrational men who aspire to power and wealth and are guided by the talk and opinion of others will not achieve the peace, happiness, and liberty assured to those who travel the hidden path. The poem continues on to mention a ship in a storm, and how the sailors aboard are motivated only by greed and ambition, and they will not meet the harmonious end of those who travel the hidden path. Ode to Salinas. Another well-known poem composed by Fray Luis is an ode written for his friend Francisco de Salinas. They frequently spoke about art and poetry, and listened to music together. Salinas was an organist and composer, who shared Fray Luis's belief that music can make one more religious, and that it inspires man to contemplate spiritual matters. The ode, an excerpt of which is listed below, includes numerous positive images about music as a means to contemplate the divine and to overcome ignorance and foolishness. Later reputation. In subsequent centuries, Fray Luis was especially praised in Spain as a poet. In 1631, the poet Francisco de Quevedo prepared an edition of León's poems. In the 18th century he was the source of inspiration to various neoclassical poets. Modern translations. The Unknown Light. The Poems of Fray Luis de León. Translation and introduction by Willis Barnston. Rivers, Elias L. Fray Luis de León. The Original Poems. Fray Luis de León. The Names of Christ. Translation and introduction by Manuel Duran and William Clubback. A bilingual edition of Fray Luis de León's La Perfecta Casada. The Role of Married Women in 16th-Century Spain. Translated and introduction by John A. Jones and Javier San Jose Lera. Luis de León. Luis de León. Ode to Francisco Salinas. Trans Michael Smith.